Act 1. The Wrongdoing and the Discovery. They thought they could just wipe me off the map just like that. A few forged signatures, a quiet sale, and poof. 80 years of family history was gone. It was about more than land, you know. It was my whole life. My identity. Sold off by a bunch of self-important suburbanites who decided my dirt was too dusty for their manicured lawns. If you think your HOA is a pain, wait until you hear how these jackals tried to steal 2,000 acres from me, only to discover I was holding the deed to the ground their entire little kingdom was built on. My name is Clay Jennings. The land is the Broken Arrow Ranch. It has been my family's since 1942. We grew wheat, we ran cattle, and we kept to ourselves. Then, about 10 years ago, the city limits decided to get ambitious, and the Arlington Heights estate sprouted up right along my eastern fence line. Their HOA, run by a guy named Mitch Henderson, a former telemarketer who thought a blazer and a golf cart made him a feudal lord, immediately took exception to everything about my existence. The letters started as a joke, complaints about the rustic aesthetic of my antique combine, demands to pressure wash my century-old barn, and my personal favorite, a formal notice about the excessive and disruptive sounds of nature coming from my livestock. I used to just toss them in the burn barrel. But Mitch, he was a snake, the kind who smiled at you while calculating the worth of your property in his head. And he didn't take being ignored very well. The morning I found out, the air was thick and golden, smelling like fresh-cut hay, and I was about to head out when my attorney, an old weary bulldog named Barnaby, called. His voice wasn't tight with irritation, it was thin with shock. "Clay," he said, "we have a catastrophic problem. Arlington Heights claims they own your central property. They already sold it to a luxury developer." I laughed. Seriously, I almost hung up. "That's impossible, Barnaby. I haven't signed a damn thing. My deed is locked in a safe," but he insisted. Within the hour, I was standing in a Stale County office, staring at a stack of papers that made my blood run cold. There it was. A sales agreement transferring 2,000 acres of Broken Arrow Ranch to the HOA, complete with a signature that was a poor, ugly imitation of mine. Mitch had forged the sale. And the worst part? The final approval was notarized by his own wife, Sharon. They weren't just being petty. They were committing grand larceny. The developer, Magnolia Group, was set to break ground in 3 weeks. The idea of losing that land, the fields where my dad taught me to drive, the creek where I proposed to my wife, it wasn't just a financial loss. It felt like a physical violation, like watching someone burn your family photos. "We fight them," I told Barnaby, my hands shaking not from fear but from a cold, simmering rage. "I have the original deeds. This is fraud. We file the lawsuit today." But as I was getting ready to leave, Barnaby, ever the meticulous one, slid an ancient, brittle envelope across the table. "Before you go, Clay, your grandfather's will had this attachment. A small transfer of 200 acres from 1958. It was never incorporated into your main ranch deed, just a separate parcel for tax purposes. I doubt it matters, but for due diligence, I didn't look at it then. I was too focused on the fight for the 2,000 acres. Back at the ranch, I poured a stiff drink, pulled out all the ancestral documents, and started cross-referencing everything. That's when the 200-acre parcel finally caught my eye. It was labeled the North Boundary Lot. I pulled out the old hand-drawn county maps, the ones dating back to the 50s, and painstakingly layered the North Boundary Lot over the current zoning plan for Arlington Heights. My heart didn't just pound. It went absolutely silent, then kicked back to life with a ferocious, joyful thunder. The North Boundary Lot didn't just touch Arlington Heights. It sliced right through it. It was the legal foundation for the entire newer section of the development, the most exclusive part, the part where the big houses, including Mitch Henderson's sprawling monstrosity and the fancy HOA clubhouse, were built. They had stolen my land, but in their rush, in their arrogance, they had built their own kingdom on my land first, and somewhere in some sloppy legal paperwork, they had missed a crucial decades-old transfer. The ground they walked on, the foundation of their entire smug enterprise, legally belonged to me. I looked out over the fence line, toward the perfectly uniform beige roofs of Arlington Heights, and a slow, almost frightening grin stretched across my face. This wasn't about getting my land back anymore. This was about something biblical. I called Barnaby, who was still drafting the fraud lawsuit. "Change of plans," I said, my voice low and steady. "We don't stop the sale. We let them think they've won. And then, Barnaby, then we take everything. Act HOA. The escalation and the takedown. The next few weeks were pure theater. I played the part of the distraught, outmatched farmer beautifully. I showed up at the courthouse, frantic, filing my futile protest against the fraudulent 2,000-acre sale. I even made a scene at their HOA meeting, yelling about the injustice while Mitch stood there, arms crossed, the picture of smug corporate power, whispering to Sharon about how I'd eventually settle for pennies. I wanted them to feel untouchable. I needed them to bury themselves. While they were busy preparing their bulldozers for my wheat fields, I was quietly building the legal bomb under their feet. I didn't just look for legal documents. I looked for motive. In the county records office, I found the minutes from an HOA board meeting 4 years prior. Buried in a footnote right there in black and white was a discussion about a minor land title anomaly regarding the north boundary that they had voted to ignore to keep the project on schedule. They knew. They had knowingly built their homes on questionable ground. That was my smoking gun. Then I started talking to the residents. Not the board members, but the regular folks. I found one woman, Martha, who had been fined for everything from a slightly too dark front door to having non-HOA approved wind chimes. When I showed her the old map, her face went white. "Mr. Jennings," she whispered, "you mean my house?" "Mitch's house? It's all on your land?" I simply nodded. I knew Martha would spread the word like wildfire, and I was right. Fear is a far more effective tool than anger. But Mitch, that relentless jerk, he wasn't done playing. One morning I woke up to the sound of metal tearing. He'd sent a crew overnight to rip out my fence line and install a huge, pretentious sign that read, "Future site of Arlington Heights, luxury expansion." It was the final, arrogant declaration of war. I took a picture, but instead of calling the police, I called Barnaby. "They've crossed the line," I said. "It's time." Right after the sign went up, right as the bulldozers rolled onto the edge of my 2,000 acres, I dropped the hammer. I filed the official, airtight, legally undeniable, quiet title claim on the 300 acres of the north boundary lot. The effect was instantaneous and spectacular. The county sent out notices to the hundreds of homeowners in the disputed section. It wasn't a fine or a violation. It was a formal declaration that their property deeds were now officially invalid. You don't have a problem when the HOA fines you for your petunias. You have a problem when your bank calls and says your mortgage is now uninsurable and potentially void. Within hours, the Arlington Heights HOA office looked like a riot had just broken out. Mitch, pale and sweating, tried to calm the mob of his own residents. I walked straight into that chaos, not yelling, but simply holding up a copy of the court filing. "This," I said, my voice cutting through the panic, "is not a misunderstanding. This is fraud. Mitch and his little board knew about the zoning anomaly 4 years ago, and they chose to ignore it. They built your dream homes on stolen land, and now I'm taking it all back." The developer, Magnolia Group, realizing their multi-million-dollar investment was about to turn to dirt, immediately filed a $10 million lawsuit against the HOA and Mitch Henderson personally. The board members, seeing the writing on the wall, scrambled to save themselves, claiming Mitch acted alone. The king had fallen, and his kingdom was crumbling faster than a cheap patio. I hadn't just gotten my land back. I had detonated their entire community from the inside out. Act T3, the victory and the aftermath. The courtroom wasn't packed, it was suffocating. Residents, media, banks, and the developers were all there to hear the final judgment. Mitch looked like a ghost, his blazer 3 sizes too big, his hands visibly shaking. When the judge finally spoke, her voice was sharp and clear. She declared the original 2,000-acre sale nullified due to proven fraud, and, more importantly, confirmed my absolute, unencumbered ownership of the 300-acre north boundary lot. Any existing structures built on this land, she concluded, are subject to the sole discretion of the rightful owner. Mr. Clay Jennings, The gasps in the room were everything I'd waited for. Mitch didn't even argue. He simply put his head in his hands. He knew it was over, but the legal victory was just the appetizer. The real revenge was the main course. That night, I sent out the first round of eviction notices. The demand was simple. You have 30 days to either buy the land beneath your house from me at current market value, or vacate the premises. Mitch came to my ranch a week later, not as a feudal lord, but as a beggar. He stood in my driveway, humbled, pathetic. "Clay, please," he pleaded, "the homeowners. They're innocent. They didn't know." I leaned against my truck, looking down at the man who tried to steal my life. They didn't seem too concerned about innocence when they were harassing my family and voting to steal my legacy, Mitch. They were fine with me being the victim. Now that the shoe is on the other foot, it's suddenly unfair. "I'll step down," he choked out. "I'll give you the clubhouse, just don't do this to these people." I simply smiled, the kind of cold, quiet smile that holds a lifetime of resentment. "Mitch, your HOA is bankrupt. You have nothing to offer. And as for these people, I'm just giving them the same courtesy you all gave me. Rules are rules." Within 2 months, the foreclosures started. The homes were built on land that had no legal foundation, making them worthless to the banks. Investors and developers lined up to buy the 300 acres of land from me, dirt cheap as the houses defaulted. I made a fortune, far more than the fraudulent sale ever would have fetched. Mitch's house was the first to fall. I watched from the highest point of my ranch as the bank's crew slapped the foreclosure notice on his custom mahogany door. He drove away a few days later in a beat-up sedan, his whole miserable, pretentious life crammed into the back seat. The other board members followed. Martha, the woman I had warned, was one of the few who managed to scrape up the money to buy the land beneath her house, paying 3 times what it was worth. The end was cinematic. The developers, having bought the land from me, didn't want the cookie-cutter houses. I stood on my reclaimed 2,000 acres drinking a cup of coffee and watched as a series of heavy-duty excavators rolled in and, over the course of a week, bulldozed the entire disputed section of Arlington Heights estates. The clubhouse, the perfectly trimmed hedges, the identical beige mansions, all reduced to dust and debris, making way for what the land was always meant to be. Open grazing fields and new development that would finally respect the original boundaries. Mitch Henderson and his HOA tried to erase my life. In the end, all they did was erase their own. Closing and call to action. The press tried to paint me as the villain, the heartless farmer who destroyed a community. But you know what? When I stand here now, looking out over the quiet, reclaimed land, I don't feel like a villain. I feel like a survivor. They tried to take my family's legacy with a lie and a pen. I took their entire world with an old map and the law. Tell me, was this justice or was it just pure, unadulterated revenge? If you were me, after everything they put you through, would you have negotiated with Mitch, or would you have done exactly what I did? Let me know in the comments below. And if you've ever had to fight back against a petty HOA or a corrupt system, smash that like button and tell me your story. Thanks for watching, and remember, never ever mess with a man's dirt.